Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Imagine a future where the government not only polices your actions but also the thoughts inside your very head. Any thought that is considered bad or negative will get you punished very harshly. That all sounds super dystopian, right? Well, it is exactly what I did in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2. I made it so that whenever a guest thinks a bad thought, they will explode and die. Yes, it is now impossible to complain about anything and live to tell the tale. Cannot afford something? Death. You're tired? Death. A ride is too intense for you? Death. Want to go home? You guessed it, death. Whatever negative thought you think, you will die anywhere within the next 12.8 seconds. This will not count as a death for the park rating, as that would make it near impossible, but with guests disappearing this frequently, it will be very difficult to get a lot of guests in the park. It will probably also be quite difficult to stay out of prison, but that's a problem for future me. Before we start building a park from scratch, I want to see what happens to an already established park, so we'll open Diamond Heights. Immediately, tons and tons of guests are selected to die for thinking a variety of bad thoughts. The rides aren't intense enough, the guests are tired, they're sick. It's unbelievable how much they complain, and they do deserve the sweet taste of death for that. With this all in mind, it's going to be very difficult to prevent guests from dying, but I'll do my best. I'm just going to build a normal park and deal with any issues as they happen. Of course, the first thing you always do, if you have it available, is build a merry-go-round to get that sweet fairground music. Usually that's a pretty good move, but not here. The very first guest immediately gets indignant and says that the merry-go-round is not intense enough. And thus we did not even make it to number 2 before getting a visit from the Grim Reaper. How unfortunate. This does mean that we will need to get rid of that merry-go-round eventually, but for now I'll keep it around while starting the construction of a steel mini coaster. This coaster type generally has a fairly middle of the road intensity rating, meaning it should be good for most, if not all, of our guests. Guests can have a variety of different intensity preferences, ranging from 3 or lower to several with 4 as the lower boundary. It would seem that these two would both never ride a ride with 3.5 intensity, as it's too high for one of them and too low for the other. But guests are willing to stray up to 2.5 points outside of their preferred range, depending on how happy they are. So, if we hire plenty of entertainers, the intensity of our rides should become a much smaller issue, as all the guests will be very happy. Unfortunately, I did make our steel mini coaster a bit too extreme with 5.8 intensity. As long as they're decently happy, this is fine for most guests, but for the weaklings that prefer 3 or lower, this will always be too high. So, we've just built 2 incredibly normal rides and we already have guests exploding everywhere, both from rides being too intense and them not being intense enough. This is gonna be more difficult than I thought, but let's see what we can do. To solve this problem, I decided to replace the merry-go-round with a twist and add a swinging ship. Especially the 2.5 intensity of the swinging ship should be perfect for everyone and should stop people from bitching about wanting to go on more thrilling rides. To help with this issue, I also altered the steel mini coaster a little bit to bring the intensity down to 5.3. Of course, it's not that simple, as even though it's less intense and less nauseating now, it still makes some guests sick. And as you know, thinking you're sick is worthy of the death penalty. This guy here is fine for now, as guests cannot explode when sitting down, but as soon as he stands up, he will be history. To start construction on the coaster to alter it, I of course had to close it, which suddenly led to lots of guests exploding. Initially I was a bit confused by this, but it turned out that the reason was overcrowding, and that's because when you close a ride, all the guests walk forward to the entrance building and then turn around. This briefly makes the tile in front of the entrance overcrowded, giving guests a chance to complain about it and die. This is something I never ever would have thought about being an issue, but apparently it is. In this period I also added some stalls. Being hungry or thirsty and needing to go to the bathroom doesn't make guests explode, even though you might think so. I did this because they only start heading for these once they think that, so it's unavoidable. You do need food to prevent the guests from becoming tired, and the other two help with a few things as well, which is why I built them. When building our second coaster, we're getting 2 new reasons for death, which are guests complaining about overcrowding and guests wanting to go home, and they are related. While we have over 300 guests, we only have 3 rides and they all have full queue lines. This means that guests cannot go on a ride, which both makes the paths overcrowded and makes guests want to go home. This is why I'll be giving this new wooden coaster a fairly sizable queue line, but not too big though, as then guests will complain about needing to wait forever. This ride is unfortunately a bit too intense for the folks that prefer rides with 4 or less intensity, but I'll keep it around for now and see how much trouble it really causes, as so far our guest count is doing really well with over 400 already. The goal of Forest Frontiers is really easy, with just 250 guests at the end of year 1, so we've already done that, but my new goal now is to get to 1000 guests with a fairly normal park. We do still need to get more guests off the path, so it's time for a log flume, which, just like the swinging ship, sits in the perfect sweet spot in terms of intensity. However, while we are building it, it starts to rain, which is a massive problem. Guests don't like to get wet, so they won't go on any rides in the rain and stay on the path instead, where they will get wet anyway. When they do try to go on the rides in the rain, they will think I'm not going on this ride while it's raining, which of course counts as a negative thought, so it will cause them to explode. In the span of less than 90 seconds we lost over 60 guests due to the rain. And that's not even the full picture, as we also got some new ones in this period, meaning even more than those 60 got caploaded. Luckily, I built in a system to track how many unfaithfuls we have gotten. When a guest goes boom, it costs you $1 that is filed under the land purchase category. This is because you will need to keep buying new land to expand the graveyard where they're all buried. We lost 46 guests in March, 83 in April, 100 in May, and even though June is still ongoing, already nearly 200 people have lost their lives, showing the massive impact the rain has had. This isn't good, but we can prevent this by sheltering our rides. By building a roof above at least 37.5% of the ride and then retesting it, it will count as sheltered and the guests will go on it in the rain. Even if we then remove the roof again, it doesn't change as long as we don't retest the ride, as the guests are not terribly smart. This works great for roller coasters and other tracked rides, but it doesn't work for flat rides. If a flat ride isn't sheltered by default, such as the twist and the swinging ship that we have, it will never become sheltered, no matter what you do. The problem is that in Forest Frontiers you have no sheltered or shelterable thrill rides available at all. This is not inherently a problem, as we could just build only tiny roller coasters and have a very successful park, but to make it a bit more interesting, I'm going to give myself a bunch of extra rides. And while we are at this with getting some more variety, I'm also going to give myself the cash machine to solve another issue that we have. Guests are running out of money. Obviously, anyone who runs out of money or cannot afford a ride deserves to die, so we will need cash machines to prevent that from happening. Now we can finally replace the twist and swinging ship with a 3D cinema and a motion simulator to prevent another disaster when it will inevitably rain again. The Enterprise is another sheltered thrill ride, and while it is rather intense, I do want to build one and see how much of a bad effect on the guest count it has. We can always remove or close any ride again later if it turns out it's too problematic. The Rotodrop and Launched Freefall are obviously not sheltered, but with just a single piece of scenery on top of them they will be, as it covers the entire track. Usually these two are quite intense rides, but by making them small they will be perfect for this challenge. We may now have solved the rain issue, but other issues still persist. When a roller coaster finishes, all guests will disembark and exit at pretty much the exact same time. This briefly makes the exit path tile very overcrowded, and just like earlier in the video when we closed the mini coaster, this causes people to embrace the sweet kiss of death. There isn't much we can do about this either. I suppose we could only run very short trains, but that kind of goes against the spirit of building a normal park. Just before the end of year 1, it once again starts to rain while I'm building a water ride. This time it's a river rapids. Unsurprisingly, we fare a lot better this time around, but I did fail to properly shelter the looping coaster, which is still causing some issues. Other than that though, every ride in the park is sheltered and is doing fine. During the rain the deadline passed and we beat Forest Frontiers with about 780 guests, almost 80% of the way to our goal of 1000. This doesn't tell the whole story though, as in total about 2000 guests have entered the park, meaning that over half of them have left in some way. A few might have left normally, but the vast majority will have gone kaboom for having an unapproved thought. Soon after this I came up with a solution for the fact that guests were still getting killed for being poor. You see, while they do have access to infinite money in the cash machine, this capitalistic society doesn't like it when they briefly are low on cash just before they stock up again. And in that time frame, our supreme overlord, me, will kill them if they dare to think about it. This is solved by making everything free in the park and charging for the park entry instead. Guests spawn with anywhere between 60 and 90 euros in this scenario, so if we make it 40, then no guest will ever go below 20 and no one will ever complain about money again. Another issue is that there are some guests that are complaining about waiting for ages, and the culprit is this motion simulator where I made the queue line a little bit too long. The guests are actually still safe for a while as they cannot explode while waiting in line, but as soon as they get off the ride they will go bye bye. This means we could easily just trap every guest in a very long queue line and have no one explode at all, but that again goes against the spirit of a normal park. Oh, and by the way, if I now close the ride, everyone will revert to the walking state and immediately be explodable again, giving us a cheerful fireworks show. Alright, back to the park. As we continue to build more rides, the guest count does slowly keep rising, but not very quickly, and there is a clear culprit: the enterprises. No matter how well they may do in a normal park, here they are just too intense and make guests too nauseous, leading to both the forbidden thought of wanting less intense rides and the thought of being sick. I won't remove them as I quite like the look of them, but I will close them down to prevent any further deaths, and also because my lawyers forced me to. Soon we hit 960 guests and get very close to our goal, but we hit a roadblock here, and that roadblock is overcrowding. There are just too many guests in the park and not enough rides, even though I built a bunch of other ones I didn't tell you about yet in the back of the park. Of course, the solution is lots and lots of motion simulators everywhere. They are small, cheap and have an intensity rating that everyone can appreciate. Give them a queue line of about 5 or 6 tiles and you're golden in this challenge. This effort is enough, and on June 10th, year 2, we hit our goal of 1000 guests. The park isn't perfect, and guests are still dying from a few rides that are a bit too intense and nauseating, but it's good enough to get 1000 guests. And if we look at the thoughts that all of our guests have, there are only positive ones on the list, so we have just beaten Disney at being the happiest place on earth. It's a bit unfortunate that another 2300 guests had to die to get us here, but hey, that's life, there's nothing we can do about that. If you enjoyed this challenge, let me know what other things you want me to attempt. I'm not great at coding, but simple things like this I can do. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in... Hey, who are you? What are you doing? No, I didn't do anything wrong. No, I don't want to go to prison. Let me go. Let me go! Let me go! No!